I need to do anything else.
Turn that off. Okay.
All right, so thank you for joining us. This is Tressa Rayford with Don't Shoot Portland and Ty Carpenter, and we're here with Elizabeth Peck from the City Auditor's Office. And we're excited about the information in the report being shared with our public and why we believe that there's been a lot of conversations about the content of this report. We also believe that engagement in this process gives you an opportunity to ask questions or to provide general ideas on things that should be included, or for clarity sake, to be able to receive this information and know where it came from and how to receive more information. So thank you again for participating, and those that will see the recorded version of this program. All right, and Elizabeth, we'll let you have the floor since there's an hour and we know there's a presentation and we want Q&A.
Okay.
And however you want to present.
I will start my slideshow and go ahead and share my screen.
Awesome.
And it's
Is that coming up for you all?
Yeah, it looks great. Thank you.
Great. So it's great to be here, and I hope I'm here to share information on an audit we put out a couple weeks ago about police intelligence gathering at the City of Portland. There's a few things I'm going to talk to you about today. First, I'll tell you a little bit more about how the Auditor's Office works. Then we'll talk a little bit about the audit itself. And then at the end, I'll give you some more information about how you can be involved in the auditing process if you're looking for ways to bring your advocacy and thoughts to the process of decision-making at the City of Portland. So this is a chart that kind of shows how our form of government works in Portland. So as you may know, the city is structured in a commissioner form of government. There are 5 council members, the mayor and the commissioners, that fulfill both executive and legislative branch functions. What's less known is that there's also a 6th elected official. Mary Hull Caballero is the current auditor, and she describes the auditor's job as keeping an eye on the other 5 in their executive roles as administrators. This is an org chart for our office. I work for the Audit Services Division, which is over on the left side. But within our office, we also have the Independent Police Review, which investigates police misconduct, the Ombudsman, who investigates complaints and unfair treatment, Archives and Records, which keeps track of city documents for research, and all under one branch, the Council Clerk, who runs city council meetings, Elections, which registers and vets candidates for office, and Lobby Registration, which keeps track of contacts between city officials and organizations and businesses. In audit services, we conduct performance audits to help make Portland government effective, efficient, and equitable. We review city functions and programs and then produce public reports with findings and recommendations for improvement. Through our work, we hold city government accountable. We have 9 people on staff in audit services, and we have diverse backgrounds, including public administration, law, social and life sciences, and journalism. Anyone with an interest in how and why systems work can audit, but mostly we're all committed to helping the city work better. I personally have an undergraduate degree in anthropology and a master's in urban planning. I worked to promote recycling in Washington County for a few years, and then I lived in Prague and worked at the embassy. And then I moved back to my hometown of New Orleans, where I got involved in government oversight after Hurricane Katrina. We audit all parts of city government. We look at construction projects, water provision, fire, technology, environmental compliance, transportation, finances, and police. And then we produce public reports. And we produce these reports to promote change. A few topics we've talked about recently have been enhanced service districts, like downtown clean and safe, police overtime, and the gang enforcement team. But today I'm here to talk to you about the audit we just put out on police intelligence gathering and surveillance. Our audit objective was to determine whether privacy and civil liberties were protected in 2020 by Portland police conducting investigations related to the Black Lives Matter protests. And a second objective was to determine whether the Bureau applied data governance standards for surveillance technology. This is the criteria we used for the audit. This is a state law, ORS 181A.250. The law says that it prohibits law enforcement from collecting information or maintaining information about political activity unless there are reasonable grounds to suspect criminal conduct. So the first area we looked at was how did police protect information about protesters while they were policing protesters. And then this is a picture we found in police files of some people who were protesting who were not engaged in criminal activity. So we found 5 examples. We took a sample of police reports related to the protests, and we found 5 examples of police collecting information about protesters who weren't engaged in criminal activity. One was a description of an officer recording protesters using his personal phone. We found a photo of protesters. We found a video of people presumed to be protest organizers. We found a report by an officer who recorded license plates of vehicles near a protest. And we found photos and videos from protests that a detective had saved from publicly available social media. Some other cities we looked at, such as San Francisco and the District of Columbia, have rules in place about how to authorize the collection of evidence about protesters and the training required to do it. Portland did not have a similar rule, and officers were left on their own to decide whether and how to collect evidence. For the second part of our audit, we looked specifically at the Criminal Intelligence Unit. Unlike the officers who were working protests, those in the Criminal Intelligence Unit were trained in conducting investigations related to First Amendment activity. They also had policies and procedures that limited access to information and rules about when information should be destroyed if criminal conduct was not suspected. But they didn't follow those rules and kept reports with information about political activity in the Bureau's standard record-keeping system. This meant that instead of restricting access to just the 6 staffers in the Criminal Intelligence Unit, the reports were available to every sworn person in the Bureau, as well as those in Lake Oswego and Scappoose. It also meant that instead of purging reports after 30 days, if there was no criminal conduct, reports were saved for 20 years, like standard reports. We identified 6 work products that included information about political activity. A person suspected of surveilling a police building who was not. A report and bulletin about a person planning to protest actions by the Oregon Attorney General. A bulletin from Vancouver Police describing a vehicle playing anti-law enforcement music. A report about a perceived social media threat to the Multnomah County District Attorney. A report about assistance provided to a New Jersey law enforcement about political activity from a Portland internet address, and a report about a person who expressed concern to a third party about anti-Semitic activity within the Portland Police Bureau. We also took a look at how the Bureau uses surveillance technology. We looked at how technology was used overall, and then took a deeper dive into how the Bureau was using social media and its air surveillance plane. So people surveyed for our audit feared the Bureau was using technology for inappropriate surveillance. Their concerns range from license plate readers aircraft, cell phone data extraction, predictive policing tools, and facial recognition software. There was a particular fear that data might be shared with US Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Community members, though, also shared things that would make them more comfortable with the Bureau's technology use, such as ensuring that data was secure, evaluating the dollar and societal cost of surveillance technology, creating rules about sharing data with third parties, and including how data shared with other law enforcement agencies. The Bureau provided us with a list of 37 types of technology that were capable of surveillance. Only 16 of those technologies had policies for how they should be used. Those 16 did include some of the highest profile technologies like license plate readers, body wires, and cell phone data extraction software. But even these policies were missing important components like guidance for data collection and safeguarding. There were usage reports for only 3 of the technologies: license plate readers, traffic cameras, and the online reporting portal. These reports were also missing critical elements such as the cost of technology or whether any improvements or modifications were needed. The City of Oakland, California has adopted a technology ordinance that outlines rules for adopting technology, using and maintaining data, and sharing information. Oakland's council must authorize surveillance technology purchases and seeks advice from a privacy commission. Oakland's ordinance requires staff to draft use policies for each type of surveillance technology, including who has access and how data is collected, protected, and shared. And staff must also submit a report to the Privacy Commission that includes information about how all surveillance technology is used, its effectiveness, and recommendations for changes in use. The Smart Cities team at the City of Portland is also working on putting together a surveillance technology ordinance that it could include some of these elements. Next, we looked at how officers were using social media. Social media is becoming an essential law enforcement tool. Law enforcement can use social media for several different purposes. Overt investigations use publicly available information such as Twitter. Discreet investigations might be similar to wearing plain clothes or patrolling in an unmarked car. An example of this type of use might be using a private internet service provider to read a blog. And finally, there's covert investigations, which are similar to undercover activities, such as using a fictitious account or getting a court order to intercept data. Oregon Revised Statute 181A.250 prohibits law enforcement from collecting information about the political, religious, or social views or associations and activities without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. That kind of information is inherent in social media. We reviewed a sample of 25 instances in which criminal intelligence unit officers used social media. 7 were appropriately documented. 16 did not have documentation of suspicion of criminal activity. And these included 3 instances in which subjects were not associated with any active criminal cases, 4 in which inquiries came from other agencies but were not documented, and 9 instances in which work products did not include documentation of suspected criminal activity. The Bureau's social media directive did not include instructions about how to use it for investigative cases. Instead, the directive was focused on personal use. And finally, we took a look at the Air Support Unit. The Bureau's use of aircraft evoked fear in more community members and protesters interviewed than any other intelligence gathering or surveillance tools. People were concerned the Bureau used its airplane to collect information on individual protesters. In contrast to this level of concern, we found no evidence in a sample of recordings created during the protests of collection of information of political activity. The technology did not appear capable of capturing information in enough detail to identify individuals or vehicles. It was used to follow vehicles, that were identified by officers on the ground and to provide a bird's eye view when officers were pursuing subjects. And if you're interested, we included examples of the videos in our online report. The disconnect between public concern and air support's capability may be due to air support not making public reports about its activities. We made 2 recommendations related to collecting information about political activity. The first was to create a directive with instructions for how to conduct investigations associated with First Amendment activity. And the second was to create a procedure that limited access to and retention of the kind of information defined by ORS 1E1A.215. On the technology side, we made 3 recommendations. The first was to adopt a technology directive that included council authorization of surveillance technology, advice from a privacy commission, and requirements for policies and reporting. The second was to adopt a directive to provide guidance for the appropriate use of social media when conducting investigations. And the third was to publish reports on the use of surveillance technology to ease public concerns. Our main focus here was reporting on the use of air support, but the Bureau could be more transparent about other technologies as well. Generally, the Bureau agreed with our audit recommendations, and we'll follow up in 1 year to check on how things stand. So next, I want to talk to you a little bit about how you can become more involved in our auditing process. The first thing is that you can share information on what you think we should audit. Every year, the city auditor puts together a list of the topics she wants us to audit, and we take information from the public about what important topics should be included on that list. So you can use this QR code to go to a website where you can suggest audit topics. Once an audit is started, there are other ways to get involved. We ask for public input in identifying risks related to a particular audit topic. Sometimes we ask for people to fill out a survey, or we'll set up interviews or focus groups, and we advertise these opportunities on Twitter. The final way you can be involved is to hold elected officials accountable. We publish follow-up reports to our audits to let the public know when recommendations are implemented. And we also publish an annual report comparing the percentage of recommendations implemented across elected officials and bureaus. If you want to see a particular audit recommendation implemented, you can contact the commissioner in charge of that bureau to let them know that you're interested in seeing that done. And then finally, I just have my information here. So my name again is Elizabeth Pape, and my email is there. So if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to hear what you have to say. And with that, I can answer questions, or we could discuss the audit.
So far there aren't any questions on the YouTube, and we're still looking at our social medias. So we can discuss the audit. First of all, what prompted the audit? I know that there's been lawsuits like the ones we've done, and reports on tear gas and different environmental demands because of the way that people were treated during a time of quarantine and a global pandemic. But what prompted your office? What was the most important reason for this type of audit to happen?
I think this was an audit topic that came from the community. So some people went to the city auditor and told her that they were concerned about how police were collecting information on people who were protesting. Once we started digging into that, I think they were also concerned because there's really not a lot of transparency about the work that the Criminal Intelligence Unit does. It's kind of an obscure little unit within the Bureau. There's only 6 staffers assigned. They report directly to the chief, so they're not in any of the other chains of command. And a lot of people just don't know what they do. So I think there was sort of curiosity about what they do. And then also just concerns because so many people had been involved in the protests and were interested to know what were the police collecting information on us or not.
Okay. I was going to say, I know that a lot of people were not in uniform during the protest because a lot of people had concerns that they didn't know like what or if people were from certain law enforcement agencies and different things like that. So when I hear like special department or special unit, I'm always wondering if that might also include like a possible informant relationship, or is there agents on the ground? And I know that like through the terms of the JTTF that there are unknown partnerships within our bureau that probably wouldn't be made known because of the clearances. But you know, one is always curious about those things. Were there any things like that that came up?
Yeah, we did see police reports from Portland officers who were dressed in plain clothes. Those were not some of the inappropriate police reports. People who were plain clothes were writing police reports about people who were engaged in criminal activity. But they were out there making observations. I think as far as the activities of federal officers, you know, and maybe not surprising, but we don't really have an eye into what the federal government does. We have really good access into what City of Portland does. We can request records, we can talk to anyone who works for the City of Portland, and you know, have really good tools in our legislative, in the laws that are about our audit, or about our office. Also the charter requirements that established our office. But we don't have that window into the federal government at all. And there was actually one police report or document that had been referenced that came from the federal government. And I think it was something very benign. It was just like, you know, a risk assessment. Someone in the federal government had written about one of the earlier protests. And this was a report that was shared with every single officer in the Bureau, but we weren't allowed to look at it because we weren't law enforcement. So we really don't have, any oversight over the federal government.
Okay. So we do have some questions now here in the YouTube chat. Someone asked, they say, I think you touched on this at the end, but how much weight do the recommendations that the auditor's office give, how much weight do those recommendations carry? The council isn't obligated to implement them, ?
Yeah, it's true. The council is not obligated to implement them. So we share our information with the public. We follow up. We'll tell you whether or not the recommendations are implemented. But we really rely on you all to put pressure on the city council and the city council to put pressure on the Bureau to implement our recommendations. So if there's something you think is important, you should take the tools in the audit report that we put together, and you can use that language to talk to the city councilors, to talk to the commissioners, to try to see change happen.
And as we've done in the past, since, the Ferguson uprisings, when we were making complaints and bringing in video and documenting the assaults that we were enduring. But what we've done is also used it in courtrooms and used it for investigations and to kind of help frame policy with our legislative lawmakers, because things that are happening here because of the bureaucracy that is involved and because of the threat of violence or retaliation, sometimes it's pretty good to kind of document and put it on the record in other spaces. So that's how I've been able to utilize some of this information, and even to complement the direct engagement that we have as organizers and community leaders.
I also would say, if there's something you want to know more about, if there's an area of the government, whether it's police or, how the streets are run or anything, let us know that that's something that's important to you. And we can use our access to dig deep and find information that's hard for members of the public to get. And then we can put it into our reports. And then you can use that information to help make an argument to City Council to make changes.
There's another question here that's asking if you would say a little bit more about how the reports are chosen for sampling.
Yeah, so we used sampling in 3 of the methodologies we used. So the first one was looking at reports written by officers who were working at protests. And the way we did that is all of the officers working on protests used a certain code within their reporting system to identify reports related to a protest. We downloaded a list of all of those. I don't remember how many there were, I think over 1,000, and developed a sample out of that. I think our sample was about 40 reports. And then within those 40, we reviewed more in depth. And that's how we came up with those exceptions that we found. And so we did a similar process for reports written by the Criminal Intelligence Unit, although there were many fewer reports that they produced. And then for social media, we got a list of the browser histories for the officers working in the Criminal Intelligence Unit. And that allowed us to identify the names of people they were searching for on, I think we did Google searches, Twitter, and Facebook, and then requested any police reports or supporting documentation about why they might have been searching for those people.
In your intelligence research of this process, did you find any areas where the police were like concerned about the safety and health of protesters or activists or organizers when there was a threat by like white supremacists or terroristic organizations? Because I know a lot of times that, the people protesting are being investigated, but there is a lot of violence that happens. And especially here in Portland with like the murders that were happening during protests, and even that happened, by law enforcement against protesters because of other harm. But was there any kind of showing of any kind of concern for the safety of the people that were exercising their First Amendment rights in any of the intelligence or investigations?
It's hard to characterize, and it was just a sample, and I guess I wasn't looking specifically for that. I was really focused on reports that showed that didn't have any criminal activity. And I didn't pay as much attention to those that had threats of criminal activity associated with them. But I would say there were a few that were kind of your right wing kind of people involved in those police reports. And then there were also people who were, it's always hard to say, what side someone's on when you're looking at things. So, and that's not the way things were framed. But yeah, I would say from both sides to some extent.
And when you say both sides, what does that mean? Like,
so that's what I mean. It's hard to say, but I think from right wing and left wing reports about people on the right and on the left.
Okay, and I was going to say that when you say that the focus is on, that the police focus was on criminal behavior, just to be clear and for the record, just, for the audience and myself, I would like to say that I believe that like white supremacist violence and threats of white supremacist violence should be categorized as hate crimes, but I know that we call them bias crimes and then we protect them with free speech. But I just wanted to be clear that in my opinion, I think that it's violent criminal activity, when it's happening. So, and then especially like when it's kind of supported or sidelined as a threat by law enforcement that are supposed to like protect all of us.
There were definitely threats that they were investigating that were related to right-wing white supremacists, and files about those people. And those files, though, included documentation of potential criminal activity that they were investigating. So I guess that should be reassuring,
Yeah.
that they're looking at those things.
There is a comment in the YouTube. I appreciate that the report referred to the case a while back where the officer took records home in violation of the law. Intelligence gathering based on political activity is clearly still going on.
I think that was something we were trying to kind of show that there's a long history of Portland police mishandling this kind of information. And when we brought up that example, the police were they were actually kind of funny. They were mostly saying like, I was only 7 years old when that happened. Why are you blaming us for this now? But those cases really stay in people's memories and in people's thoughts. And so we thought it was important to bring that sort of longer history into the audit.
There's a lot of buzz going on in the chat, so.
I think that's good for questions so far. I'll check our other socials, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Were there any things that you were surprised about in the audit or in this process, even if it didn't make it into the report? And how do we get access to stuff that didn't make it into the report? Is that still accessible for the public, or is that just something that's no longer available?
All of our audit records are public record. This one's a little tricky because some of the information has exemptions because they're police records, and I'm not familiar with all of the exemptions. So, you know, if there's something specific you're interested in seeing, I can help. We can help you try to figure out how to see it. I can't just blanket give access to everything because some things aren't publicly available. But we did put together a list of the police reports that were associated with mentioned in the first part of the audit. And so I can't give you the actual reports, but I can give you the names of them, and you can make requests for the reports. There really wasn't a whole lot in this audit that got cut. You know, we really we kept it. We really hewed closely to our audit objectives, which we kind of knew how we wanted to report out on those from the start. And so I think we didn't really end up with a lot of extra material.
And it looks like we have another question in the chat. What can be done to correct the behavior/policy, and how to hold our officials accountable?
I mean, I think just I think anytime you can bring really concrete examples and concrete evidence to city commissioners to demand change, you're going to be better off. I think asking for things which, you know, sometimes seem kind of boring, just policies and procedures, is not as interesting as like defund the unit or something. But those policies and procedures are important. And that's really the first step in holding people accountable. And I would also say it's not enough to just adopt a policy or procedure. A lot of times there's wiggle room within the language that's used. So they may adopt a policy that's related to First Amendment activity, but it's important to really look at the details of the language to see that there's no way to kind of get out of it. And I know that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to ask people to do. But I think that's part of our democracy, and that's part of our empowerment, and that's part of living in a free society and holding the powers that be accountable.
Yeah, I was going to say pre-COVID, we would spend a lot of time really in most of the offices and bureaus of the city at City Hall. And we would utilize the resource of a room and, you know, the Wi-Fi, and even have people be able to present information and answer questions, so that there was a commitment to civic participation coming from the public. But right now with COVID, obviously, I know that this is an effort, but do you see any ways that the auditor's office is going to become more accessible and become more inclusive in the way that they help people even identify policy that's going on? Because we get these reports, but if we say, you know, maybe there's a frequently asked questions or policies that are connected or intersect with this report, things to look for or updates, where would people find that just through the process of city access? Where would people that wanted to be involved in those things, how would they participate? And I know
I
some
mean,
of that was answered in a spreadsheet, but
I would say our office is really trying harder to make government more accessible. I think, you know, people having the city council meetings on Zoom has been really successful and allowed a whole lot more people to be able to participate in that forum. And I think they're planning to continue having a hybrid where you can either come into council or present on Zoom or watch on Zoom. And then I guess I would say just be involved by sharing audit topics with us, reaching out to us. Our contact information is on our website, and we're very interested in, you know, we want our work to be relevant, and we want our work to be used and valued by the people of Portland. So anything we can do to make that more useful to you, I think anyone on staff would be happy to be a part of that.
awesome. And were there any more questions or statements?
No.
Okay, we did good in our time. Was there anything else that you wanted to share? Because I think, did you have any questions personally, or?
I mean, I was interested in a few things with the audit, but I don't have like any specific questions. I just think it's really illuminating, really just the different areas of, you know, and also talking about the different types of cases and what each case, you know, the limitations, how they differed, and like what they could do, and, you know, even going so far as creating a fake account, you know, just learning the differences between surveillance and how they don't really have any directives for that or oversight is, you know, just feels like confirming some things that I feel like I've already known. But it's nice to just see it in print and to have that be made as fact.
Yeah, I remember in like 2014 and 2015, when officers were coming to the end of our protest, and they would have these big old sticks with, you know, lights on them, and they'd be filming us, and we'd be like, you know, like, what's up? You know, F the police, you know, don't violate my freedom of speech, because we felt that them filming us and knowing that we were looking at them in city, you know, we would see them in City Hall looking on TVs, reviewing footage from the protest during the time that we're organizing. And so we're considering that, oh, you just filmed us outside. Now you're threading through that video and you're identifying who people are, and you're going back out here. And to us, that was an intentional violation of free speech. And so we created chants around it, and we would call them out on live streams and say, hey, you're videotaping us. That might not be legal, or, you know, and whatever words we used. We would do that when we were filming them using the ACLU mobile app and different devices to kind of capture those type of interferences at protest. But again, like what Ty was saying, I'm glad that there's like research being done and investigations being done, and kind of usefulness of this information to help direct policy or to show where there is an interference in the First Amendment rights to free speech without retaliation or harassment, you know?
I also think it's interesting how quickly the technology changes. Just a few years ago, when I was working on the gang enforcement team audit, they were very, you know, it's a big secret that they were using social media, and they didn't want to tell us to tell that they were using social media. They thought that was like a tactical secret or something. And just, a few years later, you can get a report from the federal government saying, 80% of law enforcement agencies use social media, 30% of them are using it for undercover investigations and creating, false identities to follow people on social media. So, it's interesting how quickly this becomes a part of a tool that they use, and also then that the directives don't lag that, and so they adopt the technologies without the rules about how they're supposed to be used.
No rules of engagement. Yeah, I remember a lot of that from like 2010 through 2013 or 2012. There was like a profile, Jesse James, that was kind of like talking about different things that were happening and sharing like reports and telling who informants were and like bringing up stuff that would really lead people to kind of argue in those forums and kind of outing people's information or participation with law enforcement. And to me, when I recognized that back then through my advocacy for my nephew who had been murdered in gun violence, it was really concerning because it was like your engagement in these issues in these spaces, and with this element of you might be a Crip or you might be a Blood, like that's really violent, and especially from a place of, public service, like we know that you can antagonize people that are dealing with, stressful events that lead to violence, but to kind of manipulate that space. To me, we all knew, and I would call it out and be like, hey, so why are y'all just talking to this random, cartoon avatar person or whatever? But I see it again in the work that we do. Whenever I see somebody that I don't know who they are online or I've never been associated with them, I'm always leery to the way that they're platformed in our spaces and the way that those platforms can work against the work that we're doing to organize a community or have people even participate, because they can make suggestions like what we saw with the, with some of the social media use for the elections, where those suggestions or those biases leak into that community and cause discourse. And, it does lead to violence a lot of times. Just an opinion. Ty's looking for another question. Thank you for your time on this also. I know this is kind of after hours.
Yeah.
I am happy to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this will be available, for a recording now. So hopefully there's other people that will view this afterwards, and, the link to the audit is here as well. So, yeah, I think we're good, unless there's any final statements or anything. We've had pretty steady, consistent viewership too. So thanks everybody that's watching and has,
Yeah, we hope those
in.
that are tuning in will actually share this in their networks so that other people can get this information. And I was going to say that just to the general community, the general public, in regards to civic participation, as a person that's, done this work since my nephew died, and also have done this in advocacy for a lot of people in our community, it's really important for people to show up not only at the protest and when we're doing community service, but in spaces like this where utilizing your voice or making statements or opinions or thoughts come to life in public record. That also helps further our movement. But also, even if you're not comfortable doing that, sharing this type of information and getting people to kind of engage with it from where they are really helps the purpose work that's so important to us to make social change happen. So again, thank you for your time and your commitment to our community action plan and to social change. But yeah, share the videos, subscribe to the YouTubes, help support the work. Go to don'tshootpdx.org and, sign up for the newsletter so that you can get this very important information. And Elizabeth, if you had any, I know that you shared a lot of that in the PowerPoint, people that are watching this or rewatching it to be able to see it. But if you wanted to state it just so that people can have that to go home with.
No, we really appreciate people's involvement. We really want people to suggest audit topics for us. If you go to www.portlandoregon.gov/audit-services/topic, you can give us ideas, and that's anonymous, so you don't have to put your name out there when you're doing that. So if you feel uncomfortable standing up in a public forum to share your thoughts, we still appreciate getting your input. And then also taking a look at our audits. They can sometimes be kind of technical, but we're trying to make them more accessible, and then taking that information to the city commissioners and demanding change. I really appreciate your help doing that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. Yeah, it's 7 p.m. It's almost 7. So yeah, let's have an early evening. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And thank you again, Elizabeth, for the work that you do with the auditor's office and for sharing all of this information with our community.
And thank you all for organizing this too. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Everyone have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.